Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our friend, Dr. and Secretary Ben Carson.
Thank you so much.
We love you, brother.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. This is why NAHB is one of my favorite groups. Thank you, Randy, for that introduction. And thank you to the many members of the executive board that are here today who have really made this event possible. The displays out there, absolutely spectacular. And it's a great honor to speak with you on the 75th anniversary of this remarkable showcase. You know, there's really no shortcuts to traditions that hold for 75 years. But traditions have an enduring spirit, one that, much like home ownership, can be passed on to loved ones for generations. I also applaud your ongoing success as an effective voice for hundreds of thousands of men and women who build our nation's home. Your association's research provides an indispensable source of insight into many trends and issues affecting the housing industry. And it really is fascinating out on the display floor to see all the innovative techniques that are coming forward. And all we have to do is make sure that we update the thinking about housing to be consistent with some of the technological advances. Our policies at HUD are often informed by your insights and your studies quantifying the high cost of state and local regulations and affordable housing developments. This is especially pertinent today, and we want to make policies based on the kind of information that we get from you and other organizations on real data and not on just ideology and folklore, which is so often done. And you know, it was easy in medicine. In medicine, people respond to data and evidence, not so much in government. But at HUD, you know, our mission is to ensure that every American has access to safe, fair, and affordable housing. And we also believe that when it comes to capital, our greatest capital is human capital. It's actually the people who live in those houses. So we have to be concerned about more than just putting people in houses. We also be concerned about developing that capital. Both HUD and NAHB share a common mantra. Homes are not just roofs over people's heads. They are at the heart of building communities. And it's said that home is where the heart is. But the reverse is true as well. The heart is where the home is. And each year, NAHB members build nearly 80% of America's homes. And that's really quite remarkable. In many ways, your work steadies the pulse of American prosperity and keeps it beating strong. Now, under the current administration's leadership, we continue to enjoy historic highs in employment. You know, just last month you saw we added another 304,000 jobs. You know, job creation and economic growth is fantastic. But challenges remain in making sure that every American from every demographic can share in the gains of the past several years. And this is especially true in the area of affordable housing. Few conditions afflict the hearts of Americans as much as the shortage of affordable housing. Today, I'd like to share the ways that HUD intends to diagnose the affordable housing challenge and the solutions we aim to prescribe in the months ahead. Home ownership is the most powerful mechanism for wealth creation in our nation. According to the National Association of Realtors, the average net worth of a renter is $5,000. The average net worth of a homeowner is $200,000. That is a 40-fold difference. And too many Americans feel like they are walled off from home ownership. They see no door to this American dream. However, as it turns out, the door is just a wall with a key slot. At HUD, we believe we found that key, and that key is incentives. And please don't anyone take anything from the wall analogy. Yeah. I know there's some media here. I'm not making any jabs, okay? Okay. The incentives work the same way that keys do. An obstruction is unlocked by creating alignment. By aligning the conditions for increased affordable housing supply with the best interests of home buyers, builders, innovators, and regulators, we can unlock the production of more affordable homes for countless American families in the years to come. The key to alignment, so to speak, is a simple equation. Add positive incentives and subtract perverse incentives. For example, we're adding positive incentives for construction and sale of affordable homes by expanding HUD's low-income housing tax credit pilot for multifamily home development, and at the same time proactively supporting new technologies and housing innovation. And we're working to subtract perverse incentives that lead to the maintenance of unnecessarily and overly burdensome state and local regulatory barriers to construction and development. That way, there's a full court press on housing affordability on all sides. So let's start with what we're adding. As you know, HUD administrators administrate several programs that support the production of new housing and the preservation of existing low-income housing. Of these programs, the new construction and substantial rehabilitation loan products under Section 221D4 and 220 are extremely important. These loan products intersect with one of the most important resources for creating affordable housing in the United States today, and that's the low-income housing tax credit, also known, of course, as LIHTC. Created by the Tax Reform Act of 1986, LIHTC program gives state and local governments the equivalent of nearly $8 billion in annual budget authority to issue tax credits for the acquisition, rehabilitation, or new construction of rental housing targeted to low-income households. NAHB President Jerry Howard actually helped advocate for the establishment of the LIHTC many years ago, and countless Americans across the country can now afford their homes because of it. Today, I'm proud to announce that as part of our efforts to increase the supply of affordable housing, HUD's Office of Multifamily Housing Programs is expanding the use of LIHTC pilot into our new construction and substantial rehabilitation loan products with the publication of a new notice. This will streamline the process of FHA insurance applications for projects with equity from LIHTC programs, and is part of our commitment to further align our policies and underwriting towards supporting affordable housing production and preservation. Now, as new construction and substantial rehabilitation currently make up more than 40% of our total volume, we expect the expansion of our LIHTC pilot to further increase HUD's affordable housing volume. This alignment of preservation and affordable housing development also supports our Opportunity Zone initiative, a topic I'll return to a little later, as well as urban revitalization across the country. HUD is also working to incentivize affordable home construction by promoting development of new technologies in housing innovation. We have a Department of Innovation now, which is exploring some of the many things, some of the things that I've seen on the floor here today, and some of the things that aren't here. But the technology is advancing quite rapidly. And the unprecedented and historical nature of natural disasters affecting our country highlights the need for improved construction methods and materials to make sure that all homes, new and existing, can withstand the next disaster. And there's been a tremendous amount of attention on mitigation so that the next storm that comes along doesn't put us back in the same situation. And that's going to really actually save us quite a lot of money. We're very excited by recent innovations that have the potential to bring more affordable, attractive homes to the market, particularly in the low-income communities. Such innovations include homes that use automated or factory assembly techniques, such as 3D printing and other methods, which may facilitate construction in a faster, less wasteful, and more environmentally sound way. Innovations in construction materials could create components that are higher performing, and you've seen some of those out on the display floor, and less prone to mold, wind or water damage, and even to fire damage, more resistant to deterioration. Sometimes an emerging technology is delayed because of information imbalances between the buyer, the home builders, and the regulatory officials. This is where HUD can play a role. We can serve as a catalyst for information about innovation in the home building industry with the goal of speeding adoption and use of new technologies. One of the interesting things in medicine is things change very quickly. You know, when a new procedure or a new medication or new information about a disease comes out, it is in all the journals, it's in all the conferences, and people adopt it very, very quickly. Not so much in government. But again, something that we're working on. We're working very hard on that at HUD. And you know, the wheels of change roll slowly, about the speed of a crippled snail. But you know, we are giving that snail a wheelchair, and I think it's going to make a big difference. But we also must understand the potential risks to both builders and lenders with the new technologies. So obviously, we must be careful with them. HUD is implementing proactive strategies to make sure that such barriers are minimized. The HUD Office of Innovation will be working with partners and the housing industry stakeholders to promote the development of inclusion and the adoption of new technologies throughout the housing sector. On the subtraction side of the incentive equation, we're looking at ways that would incentivize local officials to cut back on some of these archaic barriers and local regulatory barriers, such as outmoded zoning and land use restrictions. Some of these barriers have been in place, and these regulations have been in place for 10, 20, 50, 100 years, have nothing to do with what's going on today. And we have to incentivize people to do something about them. So if we tell local jurisdiction that the likelihood of them being a recipient of a significant grant is significantly increased if they get rid of the barriers, I think there will be a little more attention to that, and that's what we're going to be doing. Now, as many of you know, perhaps all too well, the free market may be guided by an invisible hand. But unnecessary government and regulatory barriers act like invisible handcuffs. And it's time to untie the hands of our nation's home builders by putting the free back into free market. Now, a source I can cite when highlighting the importance of reducing regulatory cuts comes straight from NAHB. Your research has shown that more than 25% of the cost of a home is a direct result of federal, state, and local regulations. That number is even higher for multifamily dwellings. It's about 31.2%, and in a quarter of cases, up to 42%. And that's why you can go to places like Los Angeles and see people who are employed, making $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 a year, living in tents, not able to afford the housing. That is being addressed. Multifamily property development has a multiplier effect on affordable housing. Many major cities restrict a large majority of land parcels to detached single-family homes. By reforming these restrictive land use regulations, neighborhoods could create more affordable homes by increasing density without changing the core characteristics of their communities. HUD is also working to address the affordable housing shortage through a variety of other initiatives, but the last one I'll address today is a powerful new tool created by the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, Opportunity Zones. Opportunity Zones were created to stimulate economic development and job creation by incentivizing long-term investment in low-income communities. They follow a simple credo. Everyone does best when you invest in the distressed. And you know, when we invest in these distressed neighborhoods, we end up with more people to share tax expense and who can innovate and be productive. Makes all the difference in the world. Opportunity zones give investors various tax incentives where they can defer and even reduce the federal tax liability in the sale of appreciated assets if they place their gains in the new vehicle called the Qualified Opportunity Fund. And these funds then channel pooled capital into equity investments in small businesses and real estate in distressed communities. There's more than 8,700 areas across the country that have been designated as opportunity zones. In those designated areas, nearly 1 in 3 people live in poverty, and the unemployment rate is almost twice the national average. Now, and speaking of unemployment rates, one of the things that we will have new rules coming out in the next couple of months is Section 3. Many of you are familiar with that. It says if you're receiving a HUD grant, you have an obligation to hire low-income people or train them or give contracts to them in that area. And it's been very difficult to use and very cumbersome. And by rewriting that rule, we're going to make it much easier to use and also put some teeth in it so that people will be incentivized to use it. Now, these communities are where affordable housing is most needed, these low-income communities. And the primary source for opportunity zone investment comes from the estimated $2.2 trillion of unrealized capital gains in stocks and mutual funds held by corporations and individuals. It's one of the reasons that the Treasury Department estimates that opportunity zone enterprises will probably attract more than $100 billion in private investments. And some people say, well, this is just a big bonus for rich people. But it's not just a big bonus for rich people. It's a big bonus for these environments that people have neglected and would have no reason to invest in. And we need to recognize that having a win-win situation works for this nation. And there are those who unfortunately say things like, you can't have a fair society in which you have both poor people and billionaires. You've probably heard some of that in the last few days. what a bunch of crap, you know, because do they, the people who say that, do they realize that a lot of the jobs and a lot of the opportunities come from those billionaires? Do they realize that in this nation that they love to criticize and say is a horrible place, that treats poor people and minorities horribly, why is it, if that's the case, that you have caravans of people forming to try to get in here? That doesn't make any sense. You know, people divorce themselves from reality because they only think about how do we drive more wedges between people. We don't need to be thinking about driving wedges. We need to be thinking about what kind of people we are. I think we're very decent people. Yesterday, you know, when I was in Fontana, California, and I visited one of the faith-based organizations and looked at what they were doing, the food they were providing, the housing, the educational opportunities, the training. And I'm saying this all over the country because I think the majority of people in this country are actually good and decent people who are willing to help. They just need to be sure that, you know, they're not throwing their money away or being taken advantage of. And when people start finding places where they can invest in their fellow man, I don't think there'll be any lack of resources to do that, billionaires or not, because Americans are basically the same people, poor Americans and rich Americans, and it's the values, the Judeo-Christian values, that gave us a sense of well-being and a sense of what we should do in terms of reaching out to our neighbors. And we shouldn't let the purveyors of hatred destroy that core of who we are. Now, thank you. One of the things, thank you. Thank you. And I hope that each one of you will carry that message with you to your sphere of influence, because we all have significant spheres of influence. And if we begin to talk about stuff and not just keep our mouths shut because we're afraid that somebody's going to attack us, I think it'll make a big difference in what happens in our country. But when we go back to the opportunity zones for a moment here, investors must keep their capital invested in distressed communities for a period of 5, 7, or 10 plus years, depending on the investment. And this long-term lock-in is really the success of the program, because you know there have been other types of enterprise zones and other things in the past, and people swoop in and they gain their advantage, and then they're gone. So they're here today and gone tomorrow. With this strategy of long-term investment incentives, and the longer you invest, the greater your tax benefit, they're going to be here today and here to stay. And that's what we need. And they're also going to be interested in the well-being of that community because they want to protect their investment. So they're not going to just turn their back on it and walk away. Those are the kinds of things that are really going to make a difference. And opportunity zones will allow a wide variety of eligible investments which can benefit multiple sectors of a vulnerable community's development ecosystem. For example, developers, service providers, and other small businesses critical to the production of affordable housing could receive new equity investments. Alternatively, opportunity funds motivated by social impact could help provide capital where there are shortages in scaling mixed income and workforce housing. In this way, it's good business for larger businesses to invest in smaller businesses and vulnerable communities. And as you can tell, we love businesses, That's the power of getting positive incentives rather than perverse motivations to align. Now, last December, President Trump established the White House Opportunity Revitalization Council through an executive order. The Revitalization Council consists of members across 13 different federal agencies and will work to prioritize opportunity zones in a variety of federal efforts, including grant funding, loan guarantees, infrastructure, spending, and crime prevention. And we are considering a list of more than 150 different actions to better target, streamline, and coordinate federal programs and opportunity zones. I'm privileged to chair the Revitalization Council and look forward to the great honor and challenge of bringing opportunity to the doorsteps of all Americans, especially those for whom opportunity is ordinarily scarce. And I hope you will join me in further collaborating, sharing ideas, developing best practices on how to apply these solutions. It has been said there's no medicine like hope, no incentive so great, no tonic so powerful as the expectation of something tomorrow. And in closing, I just want to encourage everybody to take the philosophy that I've accepted, and that is just do what's right and ignore the critics and recognize that we, the American people, are not enemies. And what do we want to teach our young people? We want to teach them to truly be tolerant and accepting of other people, not just people who agree with them. I always say if two people agree about everything, one of them isn't necessary. And I think everybody is necessary. And you can actually learn more from talking to people who you disagree with than you can from talking to people who agree with you on everything. And that's what a diverse society does. They sit down and they talk together and they come to an accommodation. They don't get in their respective corners and demonize and resist and act like third graders. My apologies to third graders. And we obviously must do better than that. And together, as a united people, we're much more powerful. And if you look at history, there's no nation that has divided itself and been successful. And we can do better if we continue to align our efforts and ensure safe, fair, and affordable housing for all Americans. We can most definitely build a better America with you. Thank you.
Great speech.
Thank you.
If I could, you got a chance to look at the floor, and you've talked about innovative ideas and innovative techniques and innovative devices. Did you see any that you thought were particularly innovation?
Yeah, some of the new plyboard that seems to be much more resilient. The ability to wrap, it in the product when you're putting it up, as opposed to putting up the plywood and then coming back with Tyvek or something like that. Right. Boy, that saves a lot of labor costs. Right. And of course, that then will save you a lot of money. But one of the other things I have to say is, in addition to some of the new innovative products, the fact that so many retailers and manufacturers have donated materials to places that have been hit by disasters and economically depressed areas. And people like Lowe's who come in with their product and are willing to do that. That kind of thing just does my heart so much good. I see so many wonderful people out there who are willing to help, and that's the thing that makes it worth getting up every morning.
Thank you. We have wonderful members that do a lot of that. We've spent a lot of time down in Puerto Rico and Florida. Yeah. And we're actually kind of doing a study about how those hurricanes affected the housing with building codes that we adopted since the 2000s?
Well, I'll tell you, with Irma in Florida, we were expecting a lot more damage than happened, but because of the mitigation efforts that had occurred because of it wasn't anywhere near and that will be a good example for what should be done in all the other places. And that's why Congress has allocated $16 billion for mitigation purposes.
Right, so we get these older homes up to the current building code, so we'll have less disaster.
So Congress actually does some good things. They can't actually work together. They can get some things done.
Right. Let's talk about opportunity zones for a minute. Help me figure out how we get affordable housing involved with opportunity zones.
Well, first of all, there's a lot of, public housing. There's 380,000 units of public housing in opportunity zones, 340,000 units of PBRA units. So it's already there. And we have 35 million Americans that live in opportunity zones. Yeah. So there's no question we need to bring it in. But by incentivizing that money to come in there and already having vehicles like the RAD program, which has already renovated more than 100,000 units, and there's like 340,000 in progress right now. And we're actually trying to lift the cap on RAD so that we can basically get rid of all the dilapidated public housing that exists. But using that, the various other kinds of tax credits, along with the incentive, the long-term incentive, I think will result in significant amounts of affordable housing. We're also, through the task force, through the Revitalization Council, looking at regulatory barriers, especially in the opportunity zones. And if we can remove those so that we make it much easier, particularly to build multifamily dwellings in those areas, and to build them in a way that's holistic, as opposed to the way that it used to be done in isolation.
Right.
I think that will make a big difference, and it'll make these places that people want to come into. They won't be places that are neglected any longer. And people worry about gentrification. They say, where are you going to put everybody? When you do something like a RAD program, it automatically built into the contract that you preserve the units as affordable units long into the future. And a lot of the other mixed income areas have incentives for creating affordable housing. So I don't think that's going to be an issue. I think you're going to have beautiful communities developed throughout the country. We're also working on vouchers and removing some of the disincentives associated with vouchers, because a lot of landlords just don't want to go through all the hassle. It's not that they're bad people, but they say, I can take this one with no hassle or this one with hassle. I like the one with no hassle. We're getting rid of the hassle so that people can move to all kinds of different areas, and I think that will make a big difference. And then let me just tie all of that up in a bundle by saying, in some of the places that are not opportunity zones, one of the big problems we have is NIMBYism. Not in my backyard. I totally understand NIMBYism. The biggest investment a lot of people have is their home. But the reason that NIMBYism exists is because people are remembering the old model where the federal government came in with a bucket of money and built these humongous public housing facilities and then walked away while they immediately started to deteriorate. Nobody was looking after them. Who would want that in their neighborhood?
Right.
We don't do that anymore. Now they're much smaller, they're tailored to the communities. They're not built in the middle of the block of homes, established neighborhood. You put them on the periphery. And that way teachers and firemen and nurses and people can live in the same neighborhood where they work. I think that enhances the neighborhood. It just needs to be done the right way, and that's the only way we're doing it anymore.
Okay. Yes, in my backyard for a change.
Yes, in my backyard, absolutely.
So we talked about in the back our creation for creating housing for all. I just happened to have one of my seats, so I thought I'd bring it to you.
Oh, well, thank you.
And-
I will read that with great relish.
And Dr. Carson, we so appreciate you and all you've done for our industry. And thank you for being with us today.
Well, thank you for what you all do for America.
All right.
Thank you.